We're going to open up the hearing to 1620 FN, and we're going to hear from the prime sponsor, who looks good on TV. I saw you this weekend. I said, I know that guy. I'm going to get his autograph. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you. I tried to give my kids an autograph. My autograph, they weren't all that interested, so
I get that a lot.
I have fans somewhere. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is David Rochefort. I represent Grafton 1, which is Littleton, Lisbon, Lyman, Bath, Monroe, and Sugar Hill. And at least for 24 hours, we have spring up there in the North Country. I don't know what it's going to be like tomorrow, but here to introduce the bill, House Bill 1620. And just to give a little background, where 1620, of course, the chairman knows this because we served together over the summer on the study committee that resulted out of Senate Bill 159. And this was the committee to study unlimited service area permits for landfills and out-of-state waste coming into New Hampshire. And the committee came up with 6 recommendations. And recommendation number 5 was the committee recommends that a moratorium be considered against the construction of new landfills. Now, I want to dive into that a little bit. I know the chairman here was on that committee. He didn't recommend that a moratorium be implemented, but at least we came to a decision or an agreement with the 4 of us that we would consider it. So here we are today, considering it. So that's where it comes about, and really the genesis of this of this discussion came about where the committee looked at the fact that we've got a lot of trash coming into the state from out of state. About 50% of the trash that we're putting into our ground comes from out of state. There's been a number of proposals on both the House side and the Senate side over the last several years, and how we deal with that, and the genesis behind this bill was, hey, until we come up with a solid agreement that can be agreed on both the House and the Senate in the corner office, let's pump the brakes on this. The reality is we don't need another landfill for at least 10 years. So this bill would pump the brakes for till 2028. It would allow certain things to continue to go on that are going on now, including rewriting the rules associated with landfills and permitting landfills. We heard earlier today about considering a change in the permitting process to have a initial screening before we go on to the final. You were going to be hearing later this session on specifically limiting out-of-state trash to a certain percentage. And those are all things that will have to be considered by both sides of the legislature, as well likely end up in court. That there will be some challenges, I think, regardless of what we do here, that will be settled or delineated by the court. So that's the background behind this. Now, since I initially introduced this bill, something came to light. And that's the Waste Management Council. And I think, the role that the Waste Management Council plays and the current status that the Waste Management Council is in really gives credence to the value of pumping the brakes on any moratorium. I'd like to point out, New Hampshire will need 1 landfill in the next 100 years. That's about what we're going to need. So the idea is, hey, if we're going to do this, let's do it right and make sure that we're taking things all into consideration that we can. Now, that brings me back to the Waste Management Council. RSA 210:9 establishes the Waste Management Council, and the council shall consult with and advise the director of the Division of Waste Management with respect to the policy, programs, goals, and operations of the division regarding its solid and hazardous waste management functions and responsibilities, with particular emphasis on long-range planning for the division regarding solid and hazardous waste management and on education of the public. Roman numeral 6 says the director of waste management shall present all rules proposed to be implemented by the division. So we know we have rules right now that are in process. I know there's some folks from a subcommittee that's overseeing that. So the director shall present all the rules that are proposed by the division to the Waste Management Council for consideration prior to filing a notice of proposed rule under RSA 541A. That's great. We have checks and balances built into our system to ensure that we're getting the right counsel as we implement these rules. The problem is 40% of the 38 and change percent of the seats on that council are empty right now. So think about that. 40% of the seats that are designed to be consulting with the Department of Environmental Science on these rules are empty. Think about what would happen here in this committee. If 40% of the committee was gone and you have 60% here to make all the decisions and all the consideration. Or
right along.
Or we had 40% on this side of the room gone and we had these folks to make the decisions. So I mean, it just gives more credence and to value the fact that we pump the brakes, we fill our seats in the Waste Management Council with the qualified individuals that are supposed to be there, and we go about doing this right. Again, one thing that came up in our committee was that we're in no imminent need for capacity in the state of New Hampshire, and if we're going to do this, if we're going to put garbage in our ground, we're going to potentially risk clean water. Let's go low and slow and do it right. So that's the background of the bill. Pretty simple. I would be happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you for your testimony, for bringing the bill up, and it was fun working with you, and very enlightening, obviously, in the committee. And I think one of the things I also took away from that committee was the fact that we could reduce the tonnage by 2/3 if you incinerate. So you either incinerate it or you put it in the ground. And if you put it in the ground, you put the water at risk, or potentially if there's a leak and such not. But if you incinerate, obviously you have air situations. But there are scrubbers, and you can deal with that in a meaningful way. But by reducing the tonnage, I'd like a little more talk about that in the future, because and we can also generate power with that if you incinerate. And there are other things that came along with that. But anyway, those are suggestions that we came up with that I think were very valuable.
And just on the point of that, you're absolutely right. We talked about incineration, and I think that there was a lot of interest in that. I know, speaking to my colleagues in the House, there's a lot of interest. Hey, why don't you do this? Why aren't we burning this? And I know, the thought of incineration 20 years ago is much different than again, technology advances is different than it is now. And again, another reason why maybe pumping the brakes here, putting this pause in issuing new landfill permits, could give us time to consider that. So we do have time. We have the benefit of time, and we can consider that. I know another discussion was talking about clean water, and are there other sources of clean water that we are desalination or whatnot that we could be considering as well. This would give us the opportunity to say we're not gonna jump into the ground with our trash. We're not gonna jump off this cliff. We have the time. We have the capacity. Let's look at those things, because those are things that people are interested in, and thinking old school. We know that that's not always better. So
right. Well, we're young, so we can think new school, right?
That sounds good.
Questions to the committee. Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. So today's trash day. We're talking this is Oscar the Grouch's favorite day. And it seems like this bill it looks like it would dovetail well with House Bill 602. Was there any collaboration, or just?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think in if I may.
Yeah, please.
We've sent over a number of trash bills. So I know today's trash day. We've got more coming for you. So so we're giving the Senate, I think, a lot of options to work with, and I think that there's some genuine interest on both sides of the aisle, both houses, to do something. And this is one of the tools that we've given you. But this. We could implement this bill now, 1620, pump the brakes, and let's work through some of those other things, whether it be incineration or the 602 with the new application process and whatnot. I think it fits hand in glove with a lot of the other things that we've got coming.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, well done.
Great, thank you.
Amy asked to come up, to be put up to the front line. She got an appointment that you got to go to, so we're going to respect that and ask you to come in and share what you have for the committee.
Thank you, Chairman Avard. I really appreciate that. As I mentioned, I have a urgent personal thing that has come up with my mom, and in fact, I realized how distracted I am by that because I checked opposed in the bill, and in fact, I am here to speak on behalf of my client, the North Country Alliance for Balance Change, in strong support of House Bill 1620. So if you just want to mark that correctly for me in the record. As I mentioned, my name is Amy Manzelli. I'm a lawyer from BCM Environmental and Land Law, here to testify in support of HB 1620. And I just want to preemptively address 3 legal points, which I think are going to come up over the course of this bill. First, moratoria are legal, constitutional tools. I took a quick skim through the past 23 yease of legislation, and I found a handful of moratoria enacted in New Hampshire since 2000, and I took made a little chart of those for you. I'm not going to read through all of them. The point is, moratoria happen. They're legal, they're constitutional. I was reminded, interestingly, in fact, in 2005 and 2006, first, just like this topic, there was a study commission, and then there was the moratorium on incineration of construction and demolition debris. So a solid waste topic resulting in a moratorium for exactly the same reason, pumping the brakes while everything was figured out. So point number 1, moratoria happen, they're legal, they're constitutional, and this gives you a demonstrated history of them happening here in the Granite State. Point number 2, we already have important, well-settled common law that when you are enacting new law, regulations, or statutes, both of which could happen while a moratorium is enacted, and those changes in law are to protect the public welfare, there's no grandfathering. So we have this New Hampshire Supreme Court case called Fisher v. New Hampshire State Building Code Review. It's from 2006. I didn't print out cases for everybody and the committee, but if you would like copies, I'd be happy to email those in. Important sections from this case, quote, "There is no such thing as an inherent or vested right to imperil the health or impair the safety of the community." So when you're changing the law to protect the community, that's not a vested right to continue to imperil the community. It goes on to say, quote, "It would be a sad commentary on the law if lawmakers were powerless to compel the adoption of the best methods for protecting life in such cases simply because the confessedly faulty method in use was the method provided by law at the time of its construction." So if a moratorium is enacted and then the statutes or the regulations are updated, there's no right to have those not apply. And that segues into my third point, which is we already have a very analogous precedent of new, more protective laws applying in a large project context, such as what would be a new application for a landfill or a pending application for a landfill. So many of you might have been familiar with the Northern Pass proposal. This was an overhead transmission line that was proposed in 2015. Specifically, that was proposed in September of 2015, after the Northern Pass project team had worked on that project for several years. Just like a landfill project team would work on that project for several years before actually filing the applications. In the Northern Pass project, after filing the formal application process in September of 2015, the Site Evaluation Committee changed their rules entirely, complete overhaul, and those rules were made much stricter in December 15th, 2015. In January, the next January, 1 month later, the Northern Pass submitted a letter to the record of the Site Evaluation Committee acknowledging it would comply with those rules. It was not a disputed matter. They simply understood that common law that I talked about, that when you are changing the rules to improve public health and safety and welfare, pending applications have to comply with those. So those are the 3 points that I wanted to bring to the committee. I, again, on a personal level, really appreciate you expediting my testimony. I welcome any questions.
Well, I have a question. Because we talked about incineration and you have these highlighted. Are they still in the moratorium? Since 2006 and 2005?
I don't have the answer for you. I didn't study the content of these moratorium bills. It was just the point that moratoria are used as a tool. I'd be happy to follow up on email if that's an important question for you.
Yeah, if the moratorium is like really a permanent type of thing.
Sure.
You know. So questions from the committee?
If I may.
Oh,
Yep.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'd like to go over, thanks for being here. I'd like to go over the 3 points that you made. The moratoria are legal. I see the list. Doesn't the question become, at one point, does a moratorium affect something that is under ongoing consideration? And whether or not, as I think the Commissioner of DES believes that, I won't speak for him, but the potential is that this bill would create legal lawsuits because of the status of, the project up north. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, I think you're referencing the Granite State landfill application and a concern that that project would be suing. I don't think that that's a founded concern because of the well-settled New Hampshire law that there is no vested right to be allowed to continue a practice that would imperil public health and safety. So let's say, for example, one of the rule updates was that you had to use the newly formatted form. It was just purely a ministerial update. I think there'd be a great argument that you were grandfathered from not having to use the new form. But let's say, for example, another update was that transmissivity of soil to protect groundwater resources for public health purposes had become more strict. I think that that would not be grandfathered because the purpose of that update was to protect public health.
Yeah, if I may follow up. So I was going to get to that, your second point, because might it not be said that your reference there to public health and the threat to it, two things. One, that the language of the bill doesn't mention that. And then secondly, that the question of whether or not DES procedures on these sightings already cover present a process over which those things would be evaluated, so that even if there was a particular change as to what might be looked at, that in itself would certainly be fine, but it wouldn't be a question of a moratoria at that point. It would be just a criteria that the usual DES process would now ask a developer to do. So I think it's more to the first point that I do not see in the language of the bill something that qualifies as a justification for the moratorium that you presented.
I don't have a printout of the 1620 as amended in front of me, but I do believe, I could be mistaken, but I do believe that it references as one of the justifications an update to the rules. Does it not?
It says, about, if I may read it, Mr. Chairman, in order to ensure that any landfills are sited properly, meet the need of public benefit, and are aligned with New Hampshire solid waste goals. So I think cited properly, public benefit and solid waste goals are not ones that, to me, trip the concern about immediate threat to the public health, which you mentioned as a justification for moratorium. I mean, not that I'm against the bill, but you see what I'm saying is that I'm not sure that the language here for the kind of moratorium that the bill proposes justifies it.
The citing criteria in the statute are largely driven by public health criteria. So when you look at section 1 of the statute, the purposes are to protect human health and natural resources. And so all of the citing criteria have to sort of be the fruit of that tree.
If I may, I get that. Mm-hmm. But wouldn't you have to demonstrate that the existing process at DES was inadequate to deal with those things? And wouldn't that be something that would be subject to civil litigation?
It's possible. It's possible, and I'm not the technical expert here for NCABC. I know Muriel Robinette would be testifying later. I have a layperson understanding that many landfills have releases of contaminants, so I do think that it's fair to assert that there is widespread failure at landfills. So I'm not sure the regulatory process is functional at this point, and I believe that the current update process of the administrative rules is looking to tighten some of that up.
Last one, on your third point about Northern Pass, I mean, sure, we sometimes change the rules in midstream, but there was never a moratorium on Northern Pass, right? It went through the process. The SEC denied the permit, but there's not a moratorium in that process.
I wasn't claiming that there was. I don't know the answer to that, but I'm not claiming that there was. Yeah, the illustration there was that when you change the rules in the middle of a large process, the new rules apply when they relate to public health.
Thank you. Further questions?
Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all.
Energy and Natural Resources.
Thank you. Oops, glasses. So for the record, my name is Representative Kelly Potenza. I'm in Stratford District 19, Rochester Wards 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. I didn't get 5. They redistrict. So I just wrote down my thoughts here because I want to make sure I get everything in. So from the time basically I was young, you know, I was told when things seem to be getting a little bit out of control or out of hand, you need to possibly change lanes to get on the right road, and or, you know, sometimes you want to grab the wheel, basically, you know, like a Velma and Louise scenario where we need to, you know, change course. And that's kind of what the situation that we're in for the last years here taking place in this state. I believe that people elected us to do just that, and there have been years of failure from the very people who were elected to do just that. HB1620 is really a smart solution to a pause. That's it. It's a pause for 4 years to actually do the work to figure out the multitude of problems that New Hampshire is facing. So besides the fact that this pause has zero cost because we are in a period of no need, this is not kicking the can down the road. This is actually taking the time that we need to finally do the work the people of New Hampshire have been waiting for, and they've been waiting a long time. The people are counting on us to stop the noise and deliver real solutions to figure out the generational impacts of handling New Hampshire trash. I know this conversation has been going on for years, but I also know good legislation that has passed both bodies overwhelmingly was vetoed for no valid reasons. It sometimes takes fresh eyes and a resolve to do what is right for New Hampshire to get down to the truth about what is happening with our solid waste programs. I appreciate the study committee that was done. That was really good work, and there were many different pieces that came out of this. And of course, this is where one of the pieces of legislation are. So this small hiatus basically is to finally get the work done for New Hampshire citizens to figure out what is going wrong at NCES Bethlehem, to figure out how we can get closer to at least somewhat hitting our reduction goals, to implement new and developing trash elimination, possibly incineration technology, and modern recycling technology, to figure out how to deal with the forever chemicals, with PFAS, removing, storing them, isolating them from the leachate, putting New Hampshire citizens first by reducing out-of-state trash, putting our trash first, because that's how it's supposed to be. Figuring out how to remove more methane from landfill gas. I'm not sure if you've recently seen that report that came out, which I will send the whole committee, which was concerning. Writing siting rules that aren't 500 to 50,000 times weaker than other states. Finding a location for the next landfill that makes sense on good soil. And hopefully working on developing a public-private model, one statewide landfill to satisfy the New Hampshire need for the next 100 years. I think we've been wasting a lot of time since 2019 when a permit was put in place instead of, and that's a distraction. It's a distraction, of course, for people in legislature and of course fighting on parties and lobbyists and everything that you can possibly imagine, than really doing what the people want. All I know is that I'm in Rochester and we have a landfill and we have issues there. But we are dealing with a company that lets us talk to them and come to the table and work on solutions, and they listen to the public. That's not been happening since 2019. And here we are, we're in the process of writing new rules at the same time where there's this looming application. And we're making things weaker. We're reverse engineering. And that's just, that's not what I was elected to do. I was elected to protect the health and well-being and balance industry at the same time. And we're not doing that. We're very distracted. And this bill is sensible. It's 4 years. We don't need another landfill if we do things right in our solid waste pyramid. So until 2034, possibly even later, and we could have one landfill that could satisfy us for the next century. I think it's smart, and I think people are ready for us to all come together and get it done for New Hampshire. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Yep. See none? Appreciate it. Rep. Sullivan. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Jared Sullivan, Grafton 2, which includes the towns of Bethlehem and Franconia. And I'm here to speak to you today on the methodology and the fiscal impact. So there's just I'm an economist, so they kind of brought this to my attention. I'm not actually a sponsor on this bill, but when they asked me to kind of look at this because they're citing economic analysis in here that doesn't really stand up to some scrutiny. And so I think that you should be made aware of that as you go through your evaluation when you consider this for your ultimate recommendation. So they're talking about increases or potential increases in expenditures due to this bill. And they're saying that those increases are going to start in 2026. Well, that that's making an assumption that there's a causation of this bill leading to less capacity starting in 2026. That's just factually incorrect, because what they're assuming in that assumption is that the landfill in Bethlehem, which is my hometown, is going to shut down because of this bill, when in fact it's going to shut down regardless of this bill, because that landfill is cited to shut down in 2026, maybe 2027, depending on how much capacity they have. And to make the assumption in here that this is going to be an increase because of this bill is just false. Because I personally have spoken with Casella. They're obviously in my town, and I've met with them many times since I've started running for office and had been a representative. And they told me that even if the Dalton landfill, which is, you know, the big hot button issue at this time in this space, were to open up, there would still be a gap between the closure of the one in Bethlehem and the time it would take to actually build out the one in Dalton. So no matter what, regardless of this bill, there's going to be a decrease in supply, which is their whole justification for the increase in costs, starting in 2026, maybe 27, depending exactly on when the one in Bethlehem closes down. So for whoever did this fiscal analysis to sort of draw that conclusion that this bill is going to cause an increase in costs is false. It's either intentional misleading, or it's just not understanding of the situation that we're dealing with. Also, the idea that there is a increase because we're not building something right away, there's going to be an increase. It's sort of economics 101, where they're sort of suggesting that there's going to be a shift in the supply curve, if you will. If anybody who's taken an econ class, we all know how those supply and demand curves work. When you see a shift in the supply curve to the left, so a decrease in supply, you do see increases in quantities. That's in a very simplistic model. That's the assumption that this is a closed system for a unique market. And I think that that's probably an overly simplistic analysis for this situation, given there are other landfills in the area. There are potential other ways to deal with garbage, including cutting out stuff from other parts of the country, other states. And also there's incineration, there's increased recycling rates. There's a lot of ways that could do, there's a lot of things that could actually decrease the demand or potentially increase supply that would negate any decrease in capacity that could occur from this moratorium. But again, I think that this methodology needs to be called out, that this methodology is not accurate. And that's my main point coming here to talk about this. So,
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, we appreciate you coming in today.
thanks.
Rep. Germano. Hopefully I got the last name.
You did. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Representative Nick Germana, or Germana, either way, from Keene, Cheshire 1. And I wanted to say that the reason why Representative Rochefort looked so good on television this last weekend is by comparison because he was sitting next to me. So I'll take credit for that. I am on, and just came here, as did Representative Potenza, from the House Environment and Agriculture Subcommittee that is overseeing the writing of rules, the new rules for the Department of Environmental Studies regarding landfill siting. And my impression from that meeting that we had this morning is that there is a lot of work to be done. And there are a lot of really important questions that we need to have answered. One of them, for example, continues to be the question of simply how we are going to determine what an appropriate setback for a landfill is. Department of Environmental Services is at this point proposing continuing with a 30-year-old approach that puts that setback distance in terms of feet, even though we had testimony today from a hydrogeologist who said that, like most states, it makes most sense to determine that setback in terms of travel time of groundwater. And that's the way most states do it. So DES wants to continue with the 30-year-old model. It's very different from what other states have. And I use that as one example of where I feel, having followed this process very closely, we need to get this right. And there are a lot of really important questions we haven't answered yet. And a moratorium, when we're only talking about one landfill for the next century or so, is absolutely the right thing to do. What we should be talking about here is need, right? When we're talking about putting a landfill in New Hampshire, this should not be about whether or not a company can profit from it. I'm not opposed to, of course, I want businesses to be able to do well here in the state, but that shouldn't be the criterion that we use to determine whether or not a landfill should be put in the state. We should be talking about public health, and we should be talking about need. And we're over the next few years, I think, I'm hopeful that there will be several things that we can do to address need. The very first thing in our solid waste triangle, as DES, our solid waste plan, is reduction. We're not doing very well at reduction. By the middle of this century, we're going to be more than 50% behind our waste reduction goals. We absolutely have to tackle that issue. And there are a number of ways that we're trying to do that. HB1620 will be coming to you, another landfill bill that is to cap out-of-state waste at 15%. We're not going to be able to manage that issue of capacity and reduction of waste if we do not limit the amount of out-of-state trash. HB 1145 will also be coming to this committee, and that is for the public ownership of the land and the private operation of landfills. That would also allow us to reduce out-of-state waste. We've taken a step last year in the direction of composting, requiring people who are producing large amounts of food waste to find appropriate ways to dispose of food waste other than in landfills. That's about a quarter of what goes into our landfills is food waste. And then there's the development of new technologies that we're talking about. So over the next 4 or 5 years, there are technological developments. Incineration is another example of that. There are other efforts to reduce the amount of waste that we're putting in landfills, and it is not worth rushing citing, allowing another landfill to be cited when we don't need it simply because one particular company can make a profit on it. I'd like to also emphasize that this is a bipartisan collaboration. The testimony that you are all hearing today is very bipartisan. Our study committee was very bipartisan. This bill remarkably came out of Environment and Agriculture Committee 20-0. It went on consent and passed through the House on consent. So I think that speaks to just how deeply there is a bipartisan commitment to addressing these issues. We also had another bill that came out 20-0 that you'll be looking at. So I think that's a really good indication that this is genuinely representative of what Granite Staters all across the state want. So I strongly encourage you to recommend OTP to the full body.
Thank you for your testimony. It was nice working with you in the study committee. And I think it was very eye-opening. Are there any questions from the committee? Well done.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, I think I got Michael Willett written down here twice. You want to speak twice?
Michael Wright?
Michael Wright?
Yeah. He's here.
Yeah, Michael. Yeah, I got you down here twice. So you want to stand up and sit down again? That's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Sit there. Okay, thanks. My apologies. I'm dealing with a terrible head cold, so I didn't even hear you speak my name back there. My name is Michael Wright. I reside up in Littleton, and I'm here to speak in support of HB 1620. I do have a testimony here that I will submit to the committee. I haven't done so yet, but I will do that after the meeting. And I don't think it's necessary for me to go through the entire testimony because there's been a lot of salient points that have already been covered. But let me cover some of them. So every so often, a piece of legislation comes around with only benefits and no costs whatsoever. However, that's not going to stop a few special interests from claiming that a 4-year pause on a new landfill siting will be harmful. But I hope, during this testimony, I can make it clear that any such claims should be ignored. The most basic and indisputable fact, which we've heard already, and this comes directly from the DES, is that New Hampshire currently has far more capacity than needed to bury every ton of waste we generate. And this will be true at least up until the end of 2034, and almost certainly for decades beyond that. Even if we utterly fail, which it sounds like we're not meeting our waste reduction goals, but if we fail our waste reduction goals, we generate in New Hampshire no more than 1.1 million tons of solid waste per year. Now the DES has already permitted Waste Management Landfill in Rochester to accept 1.4 million tons of waste per year, and Mount Carberry Landfill is permitted to accept about 200,000 tons. And that's with the most recent extension that runs through 2041. Both landfills have an absolute requirement, and this is in our regulations, in their permits, that the permit shall make available disposal capacity for New Hampshire generated solid waste for the entire operating life of the facility. So in collection there, that's 1.6 million tons that are currently available, 1.1 million tons at most are needed. So do the math, we have an extra 500,000 million tons of capacity out there. Like it or not, New Hampshire law unequivocally states that a new landfill cannot be built unless there is a capacity shortfall. Therefore, this 4-year moratorium or pause, HB 1620, will entirely occur during the period of time when there is no shortfall or need. The sponsors originally, you may know, had requested a pause up until 2031 on the grounds that it could possibly take more than 3 years to build a landfill. And this assumed that during the pause that the DES would work on any permit application and then grant the permit. But the sponsors did change this, as you know, and they changed the date to 2028, which allows basically a leisurely 6 years from the end of the pause for the next landfill to be built. Even assuming that the turnkey landfill doesn't seek to obtain an anticipated next extension before 2034. And the most fundamental fact about the economics, and we heard a representative speaking about this, is the economics of waste. Operators are not and will not change the customers or charge the customers more because they have not quite much extra capacity as before. Instead of lots of extra capacity, the capacity doesn't change the price. We have no idea what the price will go up and down for the next few years based on the factors like the price of gasoline and the cost of labor. But we know that not building an unneeded landfill too early will not cause prices to rise. So not building this landfill, as Casella Waste is looking to do here immediately, it's not going to cause the price of landfilling to rise. So let's be honest, a brief delay in starting to earn money from its next landfill will not annoy Casella Waste Systems just because they're focused on short-term profits and their stock price. Let me skip over that. So what are the benefits of a 4-year pause? There are many. They are substantial and they are obvious. The obvious benefit for all of us is that being able to finally concentrate on improving state policy rather than constantly deliberating or feuding over one application and filing the same bills year after year. This current application has really just sucked the oxygen out of the room here when it comes to really making good decisions for our waste challenges here in New Hampshire. So I just want to run over quickly 6 points. We know that at least 6 important conversations for all stakeholders could happen during the next 4 years. These are hard and needed work during this time of excess capacity. We can work together to solve the out-of-state trash problem. I would submit that the landfill space is far worse than wasted space. It serves as a giant magnet for out-of-state trash. And we have all this capacity out there, this feeling from Casella, which if they build it, trash will come. I think it more should be appropriately called the Bay State magnet, as the company estimates it'll take 49% of its waste from out of state. A pause will give New Hampshire time to explore developing a publicly owned landfill, which by law is the only type of facility in which we can declare our independence from other states and decide how much out-of-state trash we're willing to work with. We can work together to find a better location for New Hampshire's next landfill. The current one about is kind of irrationally a remote location when you think about where most of the landfill trash is actually developed in this state. So, there's vast amounts of other tracks that are possible. It'll give us time to actually take a look at what might be an appropriate site, and especially not one that's in a sand and gravel aquifer, which is just a very porous aquifer. We can work together to produce DES landfill siting rules that are not rushed into being an embarrassingly weak. Now, let me explain this, and it's no fault of their own, but the New Hampshire DES is faced with having to do two, generational types of projects at the exact same time: revise the landfill siting and operation regulations, and review and decide on the only new landfill application in decades. Unfortunately, the DES has been unable to separate what are mutually exclusive but vital essential tasks. We have a DES that now clearly knows exactly how to write specifications into new rules that are tailor-made to allow the Casella project to pass the new tests it is creating. A pause will allow DES to write the rules based on science, economics, and public protection without the distraction of an active application in front of people. Now, my comment is not to imply there's any wrongdoing or misconduct, but the pressure to say yes to the Casella application is unduly influencing critical waste management policy. We just need to pause. We can work together to explore ways to reduce landfill methane emissions. Somebody mentioned that earlier. There's a new publication in the Journal of Science that demonstrates landfills in the US release 3 times what they thought before of methane. And lastly, we can work together to help DES figure out what is going wrong and amiss at the active Casella landfill in Bethlehem, which is clearly leaking PFAS and other toxic substance into the Ammonoosuc River. Casella has resisted all requests to hire an independent contractor to study the leaks, so now is not the time to rush into building another PFAS factory before we learn how the other previous one failed. And that's the end of my comments, and I will take questions if anybody has them.
Thank you for your comments, and questions from the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. And seeing how turnkey was brought up, I'd like Garrett to come back up. And Garrett, you're from Waste Management, but you're neutral on this bill, and so maybe you can address some of the things that were mentioned, that you're not looking for an expansion or anything like of that nature. Not opposed to it, not in support of it. So you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Waste Management, where it's trash day every day. So thank you. I appreciate that. You know, when I first saw the bill filed and I looked at the title, my first concern was how it would impact existing operation. Would it be broadly defined on an expansion, or just how it could possibly impact? So we took our concerns. Thankfully, the sponsors were agreeable to an amendment to the bill, which is now Section 2, which exempts existing facilities. And really my point of coming today is to kind of point out why that is so important, a key component of this bill for us. And I would say that one word in particular in that section is modification of any landfill. So an active facility like Turnkey, I spoke to my folks there, in any given year, I would say they say about 4 either permit modifications or potentially a new permit for either some new equipment or a new project on site is required to keep that facility going. So again, we feel comfortable that with that exemption language that was adopted to the amendment, that takes us out of the provisions and allows us to continue to operate as we would.
Thank you.
Sure.
Now, if there is a leak with PFAS or something at Turnkey, who absorbs the cost of fixing that?
We would.
You do.
We would report it to any type of issue like that. If it's we would report that. That's the hazardous spill. And I would just so know, we do a PFAS treatment facility at our Turnkey site. So
and there's insurances to cover,
sure.
the
Remediate,
right.
do as we need to do. Yes.
So my follow-up is, so if a municipality owns a facility and they have a leak, who pays for that?
I can only assume that it would be the owner of the facility, which would be the
So, one way or another, it's good to have maybe both options available, but, I mean, I'm concerned about the taxpayers as well, because if there's a massive leak, and say in a municipality, the taxpayers would definitely have to absorb that.
I think in any site, even a waste energy, any site could have issues. I mean, there's issues that can come up. There can be accidents. There can be all, so yeah. So there's risks, and insurance and all things that cover some of that risk. It was mentioned earlier about insurance for fires and things. So yeah, I think any site like that is going to have potential ability for problems. But
And one of the things that we discovered when we were talking about these landfills, if you have a municipality, you can refuse out of state, but turnkey cannot.
it's not that we can't refuse it, we don't have to refuse it. So a public facility may, it comes down to I know this issue comes up in all these issues of Commerce Clause issues, right? So the one way that you can not have to avoid that is not an interstate facility if it's a state-run facility. It becomes a state-owned facility, and you can say, we don't want your material to come in. Whereas a private business can do that, and again, the permit does allow it. That was mentioned earlier, it's an unlimited surface area permit.
I don't know if you know this question or not, but has Waste Management thought about incineration at all?
So as I mentioned, actually, when I started just down the street in Hampton at the offices of Wheelabrator, who was a waste energy company, was a subsidiary of Waste Management. So I worked on their issues for years. Waste Management decided, I want to say probably 8 or 9 years ago, to sell that component off, and now it's Win Waste. So it's Win, and then so they have all the waste energy facilities, but they also have some other facilities. So I'm pretty knowledgeable on waste energy. It's kind of where I got my start in the business.
So is there still a moratorium? Is there a moratorium still on incineration?
So I know there Massachusetts regulations. I'm aware of that. I was not aware that New Hampshire had one. To be
I
honest.
wasn't either.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I know Massachusetts has a policy. Basically, the DEP says there's a moratorium on mass burn technology. Yeah.
I'm hogging all the time. Questions from the committee? Senator Waters?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for being before us. And I was asked to ask this question to clarify a statement that was made in a letter by Casella to DES in a February letter, which is on their website, the DES website, and it makes an argument that there'll be a shortfall because, and I quote, there's a forecast to drop off in capacity in 2034 with anticipated conclusion of TLR 3's operations, and that's your landfill in Rochester. So I guess I'd like you to comment on behalf of Waste Management on whether that is actually true that 2034 you anticipate you're not being able to get extensions or expansions.
Okay. So yeah, so 34 would be where we're permitted today, as we sit here today, and beyond that. So the short answer is the intention would be to move beyond that date. But from now until then, it will depend pretty highly on what is the statutory and regulatory climate, right? So right now, it would potentially be favorable. If things would change over the next few years that restrict it to a point where we could not do it, then we couldn't. But the intent is right now, yes, we would look to extend beyond that date.
Thank you.
If that helps, if that's an answer to your question. Okay, yeah.
Senator Pearl?
Thank you. Thanks for coming in today.
Of course.
So currently, when you are operating a landfill, you apply for a permit for so many tons per year that you can accept. Is that correct?
Correct. Over a certain number of cells, right? You gotta do that math there. Yep.
So with the facility that's closing up north, we're gonna lose one here in a couple of years. Even though there may be projected landfill capacity enough to 2034, with that landfill going away, would the remaining landfills have the ability to take care of all the waste that's coming into the state and still stay within their projected capacities annually?
I would refer to the person who testified before that I look at our facility, right? So I know what we can manage. Mm-hmm. So I really can't speak exactly to the other facilities and what they can do. But if the math works as to what was stated, then I guess there technically would be enough on the books. Capacity moves in interesting ways, so it's kind of, it's not necessarily easy to just grab it and say you have to go here or there. That's what, again, a state-owned facility would be able to do. But so I guess I can't really answer that specifically because I can only speak to our facility. But if the numbers say it's a certain amount of capacity and the generation is under that, then I guess technically there's adequate capacity, but it doesn't necessarily mean it goes to those facilities.
Yeah, I guess, well, more follow-up if I
Sorry.
can. At least what I understood from the previous testimony is there was enough overall capacity to get us through there. But would there be enough annual capacity if we lose one of the landfills? Because you all only have a certain permitted amount per year you can take. That
Right.
was more my question.
Right, I think his point was $1 million at turnkey, a little over, and then whatever it was at Carberry. So if you add those together, that's an annual, those are the annual
Yeah,
permits.
okay.
So if the annual generation is under that, then again, technically, it would cover that, I guess.
Yeah. I do have a couple more questions. I don't know if they're suitable for you or not, but I'm gonna throw them out to you, and if you can't answer.
You throw them out, and I will,
Perhaps
if
those
I
come
can't
in.
answer them, I will give you the answer, Senator. I promise you that.
All right, well, so I guess when was the last new landfill sited in the state of New Hampshire?
As far as like a greenfield, like out of so
A brand
Turnkey's
new-
been
brand
there.
new facility.
Let's say Turkey's been there for about 40 years. I can't speak to any of the municipal facilities, but
Yeah.
we've been there for quite some time now.
Yeah, so like I said, I don't know if this is one for you to answer or
Yeah.
not, but I'll throw it out, and anybody who wants to comment
Yeah.
later on can. And the second one is, what's the typical period of time it takes to complete the process for permitting a new landfill?
Years.
So-
Our most recent was, I can get you an exact time frame, but it was several years again, because you would then have to build an appeals, and that then ours went all the way to the Supreme Court of the state. I mean, it's a long period.
Well, I just want to make
Okay,
sure as we're looking at this, and if we put a moratorium in place until 28, and we're looking at that number 2034 looming in front of us, and it takes years to do it, I just want to make sure we're not backing ourselves into a corner. That's really my question, because I don't know the answer. I know we've had many landfill bills that have gone through when I was in the House and here in the Senate for, well, this is my 8th year, and I think we've had landfill bills just about every single one of them. And I just know there's a lengthy process to doing that. I want to make sure,
great
just
question.
be certain that we're not backing ourselves into a corner by putting a moratorium.
I could get you a better understanding of exactly what it
Yeah.
took us and get
Okay.
you more information on that.
Well, and again, I kind of threw these out because I know there's more folks coming behind
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
Perhaps
yeah.
we can get
Yep.
some input on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm just thinking in the future that if there is a moratorium now, if this bill goes through and you have the same sentiment about waste management wanting to expand or create a new one, when you see bills like this come up, what does that signal to you as a company? Is it worth doing? Can we get through this? Will the rug be pulled out from underneath us? And I'm being frank, just because I people need to know. This is a concern that I do have.
Mm-hmm.
Is that when applications are put in, if somebody puts in a bill after you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and they say, we're going to put the brakes on this, how do you recoup your money? Number one. Does it send a signal to other companies out there? New Hampshire's too much of a high risk to provide something like this. So just your perspective on that, because that is a concern that I do have. I want to make that clear. I know we can, but we'd have probably the same issues with municipals or government or state-owned, which I'm willing to entertain the conversation, but the larger picture is, what are we sending the signal out there into the business universe?
I think, again, from my perspective, and I wish my associate Steve Podgy, who is our disposal man director for the area, and he's in New Hampshire. He's on the solid waste working group. We as a company understand, I think we understand, and we've been dealing with this for quite a few years, all sorts of issues. I know importation is a very big issue for the state, and we understand that. This is not the only state that grapples with that, right? So we're really engaged in every bill that gets filed. We are on the regulation. So I think generally it's we understand these are complex issues, and so what we're trying to do is work with the regulators, work with the legislators to figure out the best path forward. So I can't really say that we don't want to deal with New Hampshire anymore or anything. That's not the case. We're proud to operate, and we look forward to hopefully there being an opportunity to be in the state beyond 34. So I definitely understand your point. I don't think it's to a point where we're like, it's too much work. It does take work. These aren't easy situations, So I guess is we're trying to work with you all to develop, it was mentioned, better recycling. How do we minimize the material that needs to be disposed of? We're at the table. We're trying to work through that kind of stuff. So, it's not easy. We're here to commit to work with you all, but we're not, shy about, looking to try to continue to operate here well into the future.
So this doesn't send shockwaves or anything like that to you?
I mean, listen, we're here, so we want to just have that conversation. That's really important, is that we can continue to discuss it, right? And give you our perspective. Now, you don't have to necessarily appreciate it or agree with us, but we'll be part of the process, and we'll try to work through and get the best thing that works for everybody, and so, yeah, I guess the point is we understand the concerns, and we're here to try to help you understand our industry a little better too.
Thank you very much. Senator Waters with a question? No? Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
really appreciate you coming up.
Of course, my pleasure.
All right. I'm going to try at this name. Muriel? Did I get that right? Look at that. Dyslexia, and so I do my best.
Oh, it's the big one.
Yeah. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. My name is Muriel Robinette. I've been an environmental consultant in the state of New Hampshire for the last 40 years, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the North Country ABC, my client, and also speak in favor of this bill. I'm passing out a short handout that summarizes my remarks. As a technical person, I support this bill for two primary reasons. One is that New Hampshire has not been terribly focused on reducing the source of waste in their waste stream. Finally, 2 years ago, we passed a solid waste plan, updated for the state. And in that, we have a goal of 25% reduction in our source within 10 years. We're already 2 years into it, and we've only reduced 3%. That takes leadership, that takes focus, that takes education. And our small department of environmental services that focuses on solid waste is strapped for resources. And they're very focused on trying to permit another landfill that, according to others, indicate we do not need that capacity. And so, for the sake of the legislators' edict that there be a solid waste management plan in which landfilling is at the very lowest priority of dealing with solid waste, we should not be focusing on permitting another landfill at this time when we have excess capacity. So that's my first reason as to why technically I support this bill, where we take a pause and we focus on what our priorities actually need to be within the state in regard to solid waste. The other reason I support this bill is because we are in the middle of rulemaking. We don't build landfills here in New Hampshire every week or every year. They are sources of contamination that we have to engineer, control, monitor, take care of, and tweak and respond to daily. And so the next one we build, let's get it right. And so to take a pause means that we can focus on what we need to focus on, which is not creating additional excess capacity. We can focus on how these rules are going to represent best management practices so that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren do not have to deal with contamination issuing from the next landfill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. We did talk a little bit about incineration. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm sorry.
Incineration.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about that?
I'm not talking about incineration.
I know. I've just, you can see the narrative coming from me. I'd like to at least discuss that more in the future because we can reduce the tonnage by 2/3.
Yes, you can reduce it.
Yeah.
That's part of that hierarchy and a way of dealing with your source.
Yeah. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Matt Leahy from the Forest Society.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm Matt Leahy. I'm the Public Policy Director for the Forest Society. We do support the bill. And we do that with understanding that there has been a lot of activity on this whole issue of solid waste management here at the legislature, of course, but at DES and the New Hampshire Solid Waste Work Group. So there's been a lot going on. But I think, as a number of other people have mentioned, we do need to get this policy right. And for us at the Forest Society, that really goes back to sort of a basic point, is that, once a property, if a property were to be converted into a solid waste landfill, it will be a landfill forever. So even though there's, could be some other activities that could happen once that landfill ceases its operation, everything that's buried under it will remain. So again, we have to be, really, again, as people have said, let's get our policies right before we, permit. And I think when we look at the bill, it does seem a reasonable way to get us more time to do that. The date was moved from 2031 to 2028. It doesn't put in place a blanket prohibition on any new landfills. It just says for the next 4 years, let's look at all the policies and stuff that we need to look at. And of course, it doesn't apply to existing landfills either. And from what I understand, the language does allow DES to accept and investigate, and that suspension is in place. So, to us, those are reasonable accommodations, and they kind of get to the reality that we will keep generating trash in our state. That's the reality. But let's figure out better ways to either reduce that amount of the trash or to do different things with it once it has been generated. So again, we just think this bill is a reasonable way to get us to better outcomes.
Just curious. Thank you, by the way.
Yep.
We lost our bio plant up north, right? And so
Yes.
the wood industry is having to put their waste wood somewhere, and instead of using it for energy, do they end up into landfills?
Typically, and that is a good question. Typically, if the logging operation doesn't have a place for that low grade wood, they may just leave it in the woods.
Thank you.
So again, that's
just giving a plug.
Yeah. No, I agree. We're totally with you on that issue.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much. And Kirsten from BIA. I keep. Is it Kirsten or Kristen? Kirsten. It's Kirsten. Kirsten. Oh my gosh. Kirsten. Gotcha. I can be taught. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you. I appreciate that you keep trying to get it right.
I got somebody who holds me in line here. So.
Well, good morning again. For the record, my name is Kirsten Koch, and I'm representing the Business and Industry Association here today to express BIA's opposition to House Bill 1620. As established by BIA's public policy priorities, we support science-based environmental policies that balance economic development and long-term sustainability of the state's natural resources. Unfortunately, we have concerns regarding this bill. We don't believe that this proposal strikes that delicate balance. First, we believe that this bill is unnecessary. This year already, the solid waste rules are currently in the process of being updated by the department. That's already happening this year, so we don't see a need for a pause. Further, we're concerned that the year 2028 has been arbitrarily determined it's an unreasonably long timeline to have this moratorium. Also, landfill siting, permitting, and development, that process takes years to complete, 6 to 10 years, I believe. So this moratorium does not allow for us to move forward in a reasonable time to maintain capacity. We also believe that if this bill passes, that will lead to the shortage of capacity, and waste will have to be shipped out of state for disposal. Not only is that problematic for just the solid waste industry, it's also problematic for businesses of all industries because that cost for solid waste disposal out of state is more expensive. Additionally, shipping waste out of state has unintended consequences. It increases the carbon footprint because that waste has to be shipped out of state. And that's completely contrary to federal and state carbon reduction goals and could be a primary reason to not pass this bill. So in conclusion, we ask that the committee finds this bill inexpedient to legislate. This bill would be damaging to New Hampshire's business climate, future economic development, and could result in unintended environmental impacts as the affordable in-state capacity becomes more scarce.
Could you repeat the carbon section of your testimony again? What?
Sure. So shipping waste out of state has unintended consequences, such as increasing carbon footprint associated with shipping the waste out of state. This is contrary to federal and state carbon reduction goals.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's see, Sarah, smile. I had to say it. The song.
I know.
Yeah.
Good morning again, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Sarah Yuhas Kirn, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Waste Management Division at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on House Bill 1620. DES opposes this bill because it suspends solid waste permitting processes that are important to maintaining a stable solid waste market in the state, and it could result in impacts to capacity within the state that could have economic impacts. As you know, the bill would suspend permitting of new landfills in the state until 2028, while continuing to allow DES to permit the expansion of existing landfills. While our projections suggest that overall landfill capacity in New Hampshire exceeds the projected need past the 2028 date, these projections do not take into account the geographic locations of the capacity or the fact that landfills can accept waste that is generated outside of New Hampshire. When you consider those factors, disallowing permitting of new capacity could cause the amount and location of solid waste disposal to be limited in a way that would increase transportation costs and could drive the costs of disposal up. While the bill does allow for permitting of expansions at existing landfills to continue, existing landfills may not be positioned or inclined to seek permits for additional disposal capacity prior to 2028, so we can't rely solely upon potential landfill expansions to solve a possible problem of reduced capacity. Earlier, there was a question about how long it takes to permit a new landfill, and that's many years, up to 10 years. So, and as we heard earlier today in the testimony for House Bill 602, already the permitting process is bifurcated with first essentially a proof of concept that requires approval by DES, and then the applicant puts the details to their design and needs to get construction approval for their design of their landfill. So given those steps necessary in the process and the length of time that it takes to permit a new landfill, one could run up against a problem of capacity before a new landfill got permitted. That summarizes DES's concerns about the bill. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Senator Waters with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. Just a couple things. Could you discuss a little bit further the issue, the kind of context about the capacity issue, meaning that it's less the overall state capacity as what it might mean for certain catchment areas and their ability to transport their trash. So if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, the process by which DES projects the capacity need is given to us in statute, and it does not include considerations like the waste that is disposed of in-state from out-of-state. So of course that would reduce the overall capacity for in-state waste compared to what the calculations show. And it also is overall not different regions of the state. One might say that it's a benefit to different regions of the state to have outlet for their solid waste in their regions.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And, you know, you heard my earlier questions about legal considerations, and I see what Commissioner Scott has mentioned in his letter about whether we're advantaging or disadvantaging existing as opposed to potentially new sites. And, but what I'm also wanted to know about is if you have any further thoughts about the issue as to whether or not the stage at which the Casella permit is at, that if the moratorium were to say that that could not be continued or issued until 2028, that might create an opportunity for a lawsuit as to whether or not a moratorium could do that. I mean, I don't, you know, I'm not an attorney, and I just want to make sure we're not getting the state in a tight spot legally.
It would be inappropriate for me to comment on a permit
I knew she was
application
gonna say
that we are currently reviewing. I did hear the statement earlier during this hearing, a statement that our commissioner is concerned about a lawsuit. That is not a statement that has been in any of our testimony, and you'll see that's not in the letter of testimony.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.
Oh,
yes, you do. Go for it.
Could you see whether or not the commissioner thinks it might be helpful to ask the Attorney General to give an opinion on that matter?
Or should we do it directly?
Our agency has ongoing discussions with the Attorney General's office about things like this. So far, I don't have an answer to share. You may wish to ask your own questions as well.
Thank you.
We should get an opinion.
I guess.
It wouldn't hurt.
I think
Unless the House has
maybe we could ask the Commissioner to ask the Attorney General, because what do I know?
Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative, did the House ask the Attorney General's office, about any legal issue?
Not that I'm aware of, but if it did, it would come out of the Environment and Agriculture Committee, and
Okay. All right, yeah, okay. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Wayne?
Chairman Avard and committee, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
And your name is?
My name is Wayne Morrison, and I am president of an organization called North Country Alliance for Balanced Change. I'll try, in the interest of sanity and in the interest of time, I won't read my testimony, but I'll try and paraphrase what I think are the important principles that I'm trying to convey in my support for this bill. You've heard a lot of testimony. There's been a lot of discussion about capacity. And I think the state of New Hampshire, for a number of years now, there have been a number of flashing lights, cautionary warning lights regarding our solid waste situation. And things like PFAS and out-of-state waste have now become very visible and very much discussed. A few years ago, no one knew what PFAS was, and now you can't turn on the TV or you can't look online without a story about the toxicity of it. There's also a lot of discussion about rules and about new studies coming out, the latest one being about methane emissions. I think there's like 5 things I want to convey to you. first of all, you know, we benefit right now from a booming economy in New Hampshire. We're all about outdoors and a recreation economy. And, you know, and as individuals in the state, like most Americans, we have come to expect clean drinking water and to be able to use the great outdoors as we see fit. But that's no longer a given. And we see examples all over the state, the people in Merrimack. There's many examples of the best laid plans gone south and the ramifications of it. So landfilling, you know, thankfully, a couple of years ago, was the department, in conjunction with the Solid Waste Working Group, updated its solid waste plan. And for the first time in almost 2 decades, we have a real plan that's measurable. And the department has essentially said, we want to get out of the landfill business. We want to be in the diversion business. What we should be focusing on, you said earlier, Senator, it's either landfilling or incinerating. Those have been our only 2 choices, but we have a hierarchy that says, in fact, those are the last 2 things we want to do. We really want to be focused on, for example, food waste, which ends up being 25 or 30% of what goes into a landfill, doesn't have to go into a landfill. And in fact, that's a big part of the methane emissions problem that you're going to hear more and more about going forward. This plan says we want to go in a different direction. Yeehaw, we are thrilled to hear it. But our actions are disconnected from our goals. We are headed down a path of business as usual. We are letting a landfill application drive our strategy. That makes no sense to me. We have to be proactive. I have not talked to anybody in the legislature. I haven't talked to any of my friends in New Hampshire or in Massachusetts. When I say that 50% of our trash comes from out of state, they universally say, you're kidding. Followed by, why are you letting that happen? I think this issue is percolated to the point where the House and the Senate want to do something. But we can't let that decision process play out after we issue another permit. Once the horse is out of the barn, the damage is done and we live with these things for generations. Now is the time. When we think about the capacity discussion, everybody talks about 2034. DES has a model that they use to analyze capacity. You have a lot of moving parts, so you have to make assumptions and you have to have some limitations. It's not that complicated in this decision. The largest landfill in the state, operated by Waste Management and Turnkey, is 5 times bigger than the next biggest landfill. I mean, it dwarfs all the other landfills. I think you heard inklings today. The only reason 2034 becomes the date that we need more capacity is because the assumption is they go out of business in 2034. And you can, if you were a betting man, that's absolutely not going to happen. They will continue to expand. They have room to expand. They have good business. They have a good relationship with the city. Every indication is they will continue. So our model is as good as the input you put into it. And if you assume that they're going to close, that's the wrong assumption. It's one phone call. It's get a letter of intent. But let's not go off and make some stupid decision that we can't take back, that we don't have to. This is the perfect time for us to stop and try and resolve several critical issues. The overarching problem in the state, the only thing driving capacity issues, is the amount of out-of-state waste. The 6 landfills and the incineration facilities that we have in the state are more than enough to handle all the trash that New Hampshire generates for the next 100 years. We wouldn't need another landfill. The only thing driving the problem is private operators who are unrestricted land service areas and a profit motive to draw trash in, mostly from Massachusetts. We need to stop that. This is an opportunity to explore the avenues. I don't know if we're going to get sued. I don't care if we get sued. I want to fight for what's right for the city, for the state of New Hampshire. Lawyers will figure that out, but as legislators, aren't you there to put policies in place that reflect what you think is the right thing for New Hampshire to do? As a citizen, that's why we vote for you. That's what we want you to do. I want you to fight for what's best for New Hampshire. Those are, I have in the last 5 years actively involved in this. I've gotten a great appreciation. You are volunteers like we are. You are doing lots of work for no money. And I know it's complicated. But we will never get a better opportunity to step back and do a reset. This solid waste plan says we're not going to make incremental little improvements. We're going to change the way the train is running. We're going to move to diversion. We're going to stop landfilling. We're actually going to do the pretty picture that we put with the hierarchy. We ignore it. We go off and we just issue more capacity. And in the past, 30 years ago, that was fine. Nobody knew about the toxicity problems. Nobody knew about PFAS. Nobody was worried about water quality. But today is a very different picture. Landfills are complicated, toxic sites that we have to worry about decades after we close them. We need to wake up now, take the actions, buy some time, just like those study committees that you went off on. We got an education, we focus on some particular subject matters. I don't know if it's incineration. That may well be part of the problem, part of the solution. But right now, business as usual will turn out very, very bad for the people in the North Country, and in fact, for people all over the state. This is a perfect time to stop, go off and assess what we need to do. And by the way, I think the Department of Environmental Services needs your help. They can't do this alone. When I talk to Director Wimsatt or anybody in the department, they can't stop out-of-state waste. They need legislative action to figure out how to do that. They, in a moment of clarity, we would all say, nobody is for more out-of-state trash. That's not a business we want to be in. The private companies make money, and the state takes all the environmental risk, all the hazards, and all the problems that go along with it. And who pays for it at the end? Well, there's a monetary problem, but more than anything, there's a human problem. You talk to people that live near these things, or the people in Merrimack who are drinking bottled water or have health problems. These are very real issues, and you have a chance to impact the lives of people going forward. We will never have a better chance to do that than right now. This bill is not that complicated. You heard all kinds of estimates. It's going to take a decade to put a new landfill in place. I've seen articles by Casella that's, you know, they're going to be anxious to get that thing up and running the day that the other landfill, NCES, closes. A lot of that time frame is taken up with the application and all of the, you know, the 1,000 feet and all the documents and all. Nobody is debating. There's a lot of work. But guess what? A lot of that work is already behind them. And this bill doesn't even stop the thing from moving forward to completion. They just can't issue a permit. By the way, I don't want that permit to go through. I think it's a mistake. Wrong site, you know. And finally, the thing I would leave you with, rules. We talk about a lot of things, but when you talk to DES, they say, we follow the rules. There are some rules that they actually, the ones they're working on now, they have an opportunity to change. And there's some that you need to give to them. You need to take the policies that you think are best for the state, and you need to articulate them so that DES has a roadmap. This is what we want you to do. This is our intent. We went almost 2 decades. It's unbelievable. We went 2 decades without a plan, without measuring anything, and we paid a huge price for that. New Hampshire is behind every other state in our region. And it is not a secret that because of that, we are the patsies taking all this trash from out of state because it's easier to put it here. Why would we let that happen? We are, New Hampshire, it's the New Hampshire miracle. We're supposed to be smart and nimble. And even though we're small, We're the group that knows how to do it better. We get out in front of things. We stand up to problems. We don't run away from them. But that is not what we've done with solid waste. And you have a chance to do something about that. I know the governor doesn't like this. He's on the way out. There's going to be a new administration. And I've talked to them. And I think they have a different view of this problem. And lawyers and governors, I'm asking you to do the right thing. Think about this problem. Think about if you lived in that area. If you heard that there was a landfill going in that we don't need, and that is going to put your family, your farm, your water at risk, why the hell would we do that? Now is the perfect time to step back and sort this thing out and figure it out and take action. And work with DES and work with your colleagues in the House. And if you don't like the language or you think something, let's talk about it. But let's not let another legislative session go by without doing something. Let's not let the legacy be, we were the body that let the last new landfill go in that we didn't need. Who wants that on their resume? Show some courage, get behind this bill. Let's make something happen for the people in New Hampshire. Now's the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Linda.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Linda Haskins. I represent Rockingham 11 Exeter. I too just came from the subcommittee because I serve on environment and agriculture. This is my first term. I didn't know anything about trash before this, and I'm learning a lot. And the thing that's never made sense to me, which I have expressed vehemently to DES, is that we have a permit being evaluated while we are doing a 10-year rulemaking update. They are up against it, trying to do both these things. And I will not bore you with the details of our committee sessions, but there really is no answer to that. And what Mr. Morrison just said, more eloquently than I could say, is this is an opportunity to put a pause in. We have learned that there are dangers abroad in terms of this trash removal. We don't need trucks coming all through the state to go up north from Massachusetts. So we have several issues involved with this. The pause is the only way we can get answers to this and have the time to think it through and do it right and allow DES to do the rulemaking and for the rest of us to investigate what we need to know before we make a decision about another landfill. That's it.
Well done.
Thank you
very much. No questions from the committee. And our final speaker, Eric Einhauser.
Good morning again. For the record, my name is Eric Steinhauser, Senior Vice President with Sandward Head and Associates. We're a New Hampshire-based engineering firm. Provided my written testimony, I'll know we've been here long. I will be quick. But just to point out a couple things, HB 1620 has certain objectives which I don't think the text of the bill meets, and let me explain why. Terminology means a lot for the regulated community and those that are trying to help them through things. So there's already definitions in the existing rules in existing legislation, Chapter 149M, and the objective of HB 1620 is to address landfill siting, public benefit, and alignment with solid waste management goals. Those are already covered in the rules that we have to date. What's trying to be done here is to not provide a construction permit. Again, permits for construction is the term.
I see that as problematic because any permit you're trying to get for a landfill is to construct it. So for a potential appeal to the Waste Management Council, which I also sit on, I could see conflicts with the legislation in regard to that, because any permit, whether it's the initial permit for a proof of concept or the construction permit we talked about earlier, is going to be in conflict. I provided at the end of my written testimony a timeline. Some comments were brought about the timing of landfills. This is an idealized timeline in terms of years, not actual dates or anything. And it's not for a specific landfill, but just to give you an idea, if you were just to pick a site and to when you get to approval to put waste in the ground, could be as much or more than 12 years. And for example, Senator Pearl had asked about the turnkey site. How long did that take to permit? My firm was involved with that. We started in 2013. Waste has not gone into the first sale yet. That's scheduled for this spring. There's a lot of work that goes into that in terms of initial engineering, permitting with all the different agencies, state and local and federal, lots of construction that has to happen, and all other approvals to get to there. So it is a very long time. Having a moratorium of any amount of time is going to be detrimental to new projects. Another aspect is, which I don't think is an intended consequence of the bill, but if and this happens in the industry, assets are sold between companies. So the way the bill is written, if you don't own that particular site at a certain time and you want to do an expansion, you no longer have the exemption to do your expansion. So if Company A wants to sell to Company B can no longer do an expansion at that site because they didn't own it within that time frame. There's references to water bodies transversing footprints. Footprint is a very specific term in the rules. The rules right now, you can't have that situation. So the law doesn't make sense with regard to existing rules. We don't have water bodies going through landfill footprints. And there's reference to the EPA rules. It's very broad and it needs to be more specific for this rule, for this law to be, or this bill to be effective. I want to just touch on a couple of things. Most permits, at least the recent ones in the last, I'd say 5 years, that are issued by the Department for Environmental Services require that the applicant adhere to the rules that are in place at the time. So if you haven't constructed all your phases and there's a rule change that changes your design, you have to follow that new design. So the comment earlier about following new rules as they're made, landfills have to do that now. It's already in place. And they want to do that. They want to be current with the current rules. There was comments about landfill performance. To my knowledge, in New Hampshire and elsewhere, the Subtitle D, the record Subtitle D lined landfills are not leaking. They're not the cause of groundwater problems. It's the older unlined dumps that we have in the state that are really the problem, or the waste that we find on the sides of the street because people can't afford to take their waste to proper disposal areas. Senator Pearl had asked about capacity. The last couple of permit application approvals that I've seen from the department look at limiting how much waste can come into a site on a per year basis. So even though you might have this much capacity, you're limited what you can put in every year. So if a facility, for whatever reason, a rule change stops them from taking waste and they have to find another outlet, those facilities might not be able to take the additional waste because they're limited by their permit and by the public benefit analysis that was done when it was originally permitted. So just because there's capacity doesn't mean it's capacity for everyone. City of Nashua only takes City of Nashua waste. They are, to my understanding, the last large permit that was issued by the state for expansion at an existing landfill. No, I'm not aware of a greenfield or brand new landfill that's been permitted since the 1990s. So we're trying to use existing facilities the best we can. The only reason a client would go to a new site is because they're not allowed to expand an existing site. So having rules or laws in place that prevent expansions at existing sites where they can use all the existing infrastructure, not have to build a lot more and have a lot of other disturbance of areas and get into other siting criteria only makes sense. And kind of jumbled here, but I've heard a lot of different jumbling in the testimony for here. And I'm just trying to help you all kind of pull it together for what a moratorium would mean for the state. And I'll leave it there and leave you with my written testimony.
Would it be fair to say that you're pretty acquainted with the rules that are already in existence?
Yes, I work with those every day.
And as you see them, do you think that they need to be tweaked for more safety? I mean, I'm hearing that the rules right now are inadequate. At least that's how I'm interpreting.
I don't think they're inadequate as they are. Like anything, it can be tweaked to make it better and clearer. We've had appeals because there's been misinterpretations of how they're applied. The original rules were, many times ago, and the folks that wrote those had certain intentions, and the regulators at that time had certain intentions. Those staff have changed, the interpretations have changed. Me and my colleagues have made suggestions to DES in written form for proposed changes to make them better, to take away some of the ambiguity in the rules, to make them more specific. Some of those were heard, some of them weren't, just like I'm sure they've heard from others. They work now. We have good facilities. Someone had mentioned about releases from landfills. They're not coming from the liner systems. They're coming from other aspects of operations. Can things be tighter? Sure. We're always looking to make things better. As professional engineers, we're always going through continuing education to make us better. I attend conferences and listen and learn from other people's problems, so I cannot do the same thing, and people can learn from our lessons learned. So I think the proposed rules that I've seen most recently are a move forward. Do I agree with all of them? No. But I'm sure others agree on the other side. So you're in a great position to hear a lot of viewpoints, and this is a great country that we can get those viewpoints and try to make the right decision. So I thank you for that role that you play.
Senator Pearl, the question.
Thank you for taking my question. So we've heard tap the brakes here from several people here today. I'm trying to understand from the comments that you made about issuing any permits whatsoever. Would that be more like putting the car in park than tapping the brakes? I mean, because we heard that the DES could continue to consider applications during this moratorium, but if you're saying that they can't even accept any type of a permit, that would kind of stop the whole process.
So just to be clear, the bill says DES can review stuff, but they can't issue a permit for construction. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm not representing a site or an entity here, I'm just as I view it. So if I had a client that wanted to develop a site and they don't know that they can get a permit because it's been delayed, why would they start the process? Because there might be other changes. So yes, we know what the rules are now, and we know what they might be. So there's educated risks that they would take. There are processes that they can do that they know what those risks are. If there's a moratorium that maybe it gets extended again, maybe there's other things that add on to their timeline. As we add timeline, costs do go up, right? So the money we spend now is cheaper than the money we spend in the future. Whether it's a city or a town or a private company, there is a fiscal responsibility they need to do through their stakeholders. As we go through looking for new sites, it's harder and harder to find one. There was comment about one landfill for the next 100 years in the state. That was news to me. I don't know how we would do that. There's other issues behind that. Someone's not going to want that landfill because it's going to be a new landfill somewhere. We don't have, as far as I understand, a site that's going to do 100 years of capacity for the whole state. The infrastructure that would have to support that is quite extensive. If you've been to a Turnkey or a North Country or a City of Nashua, whatever, it's not a small facility. There's a lot going on. And to permit something with all the aspects of that timeline is not too far off. I mean, it's idealized because make some assumptions. This would go well. This would go really, but like I said, initial work on the Turnkey landfill started in 2013, and that was just before DES even knew about it. The client had to figure out, does this work for us? Can we make it move forward?
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. Yeah, thank you. Is there, so this puts a moratorium on the statutory process for issuing permits.
Permits for construction.
Okay, so that wouldn't be any of the permits for doing, you know, there must be some permits along the way to start the process. I guess that's the question that I'm asking.
Yeah, so I'm not an attorney, but my experience has been any permit that allows you to build in the future can be considered a permit for construction. Because what's the intent of getting that permit? Is to build that. So I don't want to give my attorney friends something to come against a project, but that's how I would view it.
Thank you. I'm just trying to make sure I understand. I wanted to make sure I understand.
And that's my interpretation of what that terminology means.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.